Get Rich Education is brought to you by Valhalla Wealth and Ridge Lending Group.
You're listening to the show that has created more passive income for people than nearly any show in the world. This is the powerful Get Rich Education.
Welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 170. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, and you know, here at Get Rich Education, it's not about get rich quick at all. In fact, I have never seen where get rich quick reliably works. It's really going to be at least about a 5 to 10 year plan for you, slowly building cash flows sustainably through direct real estate investing. We also talk here about living a rich life, having passive income that basically just allows you to buy life back that would otherwise be lost at work. Well, what if you could invest in something that can help you live a rich life yourself and at the same time leave a rich legacy for others? And that's what we're talking about today. On Get Rich Education, we talk to you about directly investing in a hard asset or a cash flowing asset, or both a hard cash flowing asset. We've discussed how you can be an agricultural real estate investor and directly own your own parcels of coffee and cacao trees. It grows and you receive income from the harvest while the land can appreciate at the same time. And that way you're also completely diversified from the United States residential real estate market. Now, one thing that we don't talk about very much here is something like gold. It's a hard asset that's had value for centuries. Gold is a loose proxy for inflation, and gold is certainly interesting to discuss, but see, gold doesn't pay you any income. It has almost zero utility, and it also doesn't physically grow, like physically get larger. Now, timber, that's an investment, hardwood timber, that physically grows, all right? So if you went to your hiding place and you checked on your 10-ounce gold bar last year, and then you looked at it again today, here a year later, well, your 10-ounce gold bar did not grow into 11 ounces. Well, timber is different. It physically grows. If you have a 10-ounce gold bar and you crudely hacked an ounce off, well, now you've only got 9 ounces and it won't grow back. Well, timber does grow back. In fact, you can harvest timber completely. You could clear cut it 100%, and then you could still regrow it. Timber also has utility, and gold does not. Well, what if you could find a type of timber that, besides having more utility than even most timbers, is also something that's had value for centuries, a bit like gold does? Well, actually, you can. In fact, there is a particular timber type that's been so valuable and so enduring for centuries that prestigious Ivy League university endowment funds have invested in it for the long term because it's shown itself to be profitable, and that is the Teak, T-E-A-K, Teak type of timber hardwood. You've probably heard of it before. One reason that teak wood is so popular and so valuable and so enduring is because it contains these natural oils that make teak useful even in locations that are exposed to the elements. And this oil also makes teak wood resistant to fire and resistant to termites and resistant to other pests. In fact, teak is durable even when it's not treated with any oil or varnish. So we're talking about direct investing in real estate where you own title to the land with the teak trees growing on your land. So therefore, you're entitled to any potential appreciation in your land, as well as the growth in and the income from the harvest of the teak hardwood. But one problem that I learned about with teak, though, is that there are two optimum times to harvest teak trees. That's when they're 25 years of age, and again, when they're 60 years old. And when I first learned about that a couple years ago, I thought, well, gosh, that's not really congruent with what we discuss here at GRE. That's almost like more of a life deferral plan. But then there was a real twist that you're going to learn about here where, although this is ownership for the long term, you're going to see how you can make a gain from the harvest substantially sooner than those time horizons, and that's if you can purchase parcels with trees that have already been growing on the land for a while. Hey, before we chat with our guest, in case you're a new listener and you don't know who I am, I've been an active income property investor continuously since 2002. I am a writer for both Forbes and the Rich Dad Advisors, and just last year, I authored the international best-selling book, 7 Money Myths That Are Killing Your Wealth Potential. You can learn more about me at getricheducation.com/about. All right, so now that you know a little bit something more about me, let's go ahead and chat with our guest. Well, I met today's guest almost 2 years ago on the fantastic Real Estate Guys Investor Summit at Sea. And since then, we've kept in touch because I've really been enamored of something that she and her company talk about. I was last with her just a few months ago at the New Orleans Investment Conference catching up, and we talked about having her on the show. So I'm so glad to welcome onto Get Rich Education today, Rachel Jensen.
Thank you so much, Keith. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad that we're able to chat about what we're going to chat about today. I think it's a really unique opportunity, and based on the conversations we've been having and based on the conversations we've had with folks from the cruise that we were on a couple of years ago, I think it's something that your listeners are really going to enjoy.
Now, you and your company, importantly, you helped connect people with the hardwood timber investment, a precious timber of teak wood. And I think that most people have heard of teak wood, but they don't really know that much about it. So just tell us more about teak wood and its importance and its uses.
Sure. So teak is a hard wood, right? It's a wood that takes about 25 years in order for it to harvest properly. And it's really important to note the harvest cycle of this specific hardwood because it's the time that really gives teak its value, right? If you are looking at teak and you're looking at a quick in and out investment, then ownership of timber is not something for you. This investment, this opportunity is specifically for people who are thinking more along the lines of generational wealth stewardship, thinking for the long term. When we're looking at our portfolio, it's important to make sure that we are diversified across all asset classes, of course, but also with timeline. So teak fits very well into the portfolio for folks who are looking for something that is going to generate wealth for the long term, right? And because it is such a long-term investment, we find that there are varying ages of folks who are looking at it, right? You have someone from their young 20s, people up to their 90s who are helping their grandchildren or their children get into this sort of opportunity. So teak has been a hardwood that's been around for centuries. You may have heard of it before. If you haven't heard of it before, it's been harvested for over 300 years. So it's not a fad. It's not something that's coming in that'll be gone by next month, right? I remember the acai berries that were this big trend for a little bit of time, and then they've kind of disappeared. Right? There's been this longevity of teak in the market that there's the real continued demand for it. So teak is typically grown in areas, tropical areas. Southeast Asia is a big part. There are 4 countries where teak is grown naturally. Myanmar, the form of Burma. You may have heard of Burmese teak before. India, a couple of other countries throughout the region. And recently, there's been a log exportation ban there. And the reason for that is because teak has been harvested and it has never been replanted, right? So people are coming in, harvesters are coming in, they're cutting down the teak, and then they're on to the next farm, and they're on to the next farm. And this is also a big problem, right? This is where deforestation occurs. And deforestation is happening so rapidly across our world today that when you find an opportunity that is committed to the reforestation efforts, it's something that you probably want to be a part of. I think we all like to breathe, right? We all need our oxygen. We all need the CO2. So by having plants, by committing to reforestation, we know that we're committing to those efforts as well. So teak is typically used on a lot of outdoor furniture because of its durability. It's resistant to fire, rot, termite, bugs. And because of that, it's really a popular product to use for the outdoor furniture, a lot of construction as well in tropical climates. So it's a lot of outdoor furniture again. Then you have also the decking, posts and beams. You'll see a lot of that in the tropical climates. And one spot where, if we have any boaters who are listening in, teak is used quite a bit is on boats, right? The decking of the boats is quite popular. Fun fact is that on the Titanic, the outdoor decks of the boats were made from teak. And in addition to that, a lot of the furniture that was in the outdoor decks were also made of teak. And this is pretty neat, but there is a museum in Canada where there is an original chaise lounge chair that was found from the Titanic. So the Titanic sunk in 1912, and I don't recall how long after the Titanic sank that they ended up pulling this chaise lounge chair out of the water, but they've refurbished it. They brought it into this museum in Canada, and now you're able to see this product, right? So for something along the lines of durability and lasting, Teak is an incredible product for that.
That's some astounding trivia that you shared with us right there. So Teak has had sustainable demand for centuries. And before we get our heads wrapped around any investment, we just really want to understand that economics 101, the fundamentals of supply versus demand. So just talk to us a bit more about that increasing demand for what's really become a worldwide scarce supply of hardwood timber, especially something precious like teak.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a lot of deforestation that's happening, right? So there's not the reforestation efforts to replant and do it again. And I mentioned teak is a 25-year harvest cycle, which means it's not something that your neighbor can get in after seeing that you're doing well after a couple of years. It's something that you really need the foresight and you need to be forward thinking to say 25 years from now, I am going to harvest this and replant and do it again. So the supply has dwindled quite a bit because of the reforestation or the logging bans in the 4 countries where teak is grown naturally. So what has happened over the years is plantation teak in other parts of the world have started to pop up. Panama specifically is a very popular region for that because it has the ideal climate. You need the dry season and you need a wet season. You also need to have the right soil in order to grow it. And I don't know about you, Keith, but I don't have a green thumb specifically, and I can put a little seed in a pot and it might grow for a little bit of time, but it's not necessarily going to live forever, right? So what you need to make sure is when you're planting your teak that you're growing it in the right climates. Panama, for example, is that great climate, and that you also have the proper folks who are managing it and maintaining it. So there's this huge hole right now in the supply. The demand is coming from all over the world. Teak product has been around for over 300 years at this point. And what we've seen is the 2 biggest consumers of teak are the Chinese and the Indian. And those are also the 2 countries that are projected to be the most populous by 2100. And the reason that the Chinese and the Indians are looking to own teak and make teak products is for a couple of reasons. One of them is for status. By owning teak products, what that shows is you're of higher status. And I think that we're very much aware of India and China having quite a few millionaires and billionaires there, and they're going to continue to want their teak. In addition to status, they use it for a lot of the furniture. They use it for a lot of the building materials, right? Especially in the tropical parts of India, where you want to have woods that are going to sustain the elements. Teak is a great option for that. So India and China are the 2 biggest consumers. And because teak has been around for over 300 years at this point, I think it's safe to say that there is going to continue to be a market for it. It's a product that a lot of folks understand the value of. Once you have a teak product, it lasts for years. It's something that you just put a little bit of shine on and it lasts for years. So there's real value to it. And Chinese and the Indians see that. Obviously, when they were building the Titanic, they saw that as well by putting teak on the outdoor decking. And we're continuing to see that a lot of people today are even continuing to purchase teak products. This is a little bit of a sidebar, but for anybody who's listening, feel free to type Wayfair, WAYFAIR.com. It's the furniture website where you can find quite a bit of things. And look up the teak products, right? Teak is how you spell teak. And look just to see the price tag on it. I was looking this up the other day because I was looking at the teak Adirondack chairs, and I think they were somewhere around the $400 mark just for one teak Adirondack chair. And then there was also this little, oh gosh, it was so funny, like a little horse statue that you put in a corner if you have some empty space, and that was about $2,900, right? So there is real value to these products.
No, that is great that you brought that up. I mean, that is very current and sustainable demand right there. And, Rachel, on this show, we talk about markets a lot. We talk about rental property because that's where your demand is going to come from. But unlike a duplex that you might buy in St. Louis, where that's tied to the economic fundamentals of that market and whether tenants are going to have jobs, because that's really the one that's paying your rent at the end of the day, Well, we have the Indians and the Chinese. In India, especially where they have revered teak for generations, India's population is growing such that in 5 years it is going to be the world's most populous country. So besides really your demand base for that growing, just within that growth, within that population, those people tend to get more refined and sophisticated tastes. And really the trends look good for teak demand for the intermediate to long-term future here. So Rachel, just talk to us a little bit about making this something that's palatable and approachable to the everyday investor, because we know that historically a lot of very prestigious universities have invested their endowment funds in some things like timber. So just talk to us about the history of, who's actually invested in and who's actually owned these teak plantations historically.
Sure. So for a long time, ownership of timber, right, timber more generally, has been reserved for the ultra wealthy. And it's like the top 1% of the 1%, where they have millions of dollars, billions of dollars in some cases, to go and buy a farm, to harvest the farm, maintain it, manage it, clean it, harvest, do it again for generations. And what the top 1% realize is that they are passing down their wealth for generations, right? They're not thinking about the quickest buck tomorrow. Typically, these are families that come from old money. They're looking to preserve their wealth. They're looking to keep it in the family for generations. So you mentioned the prestigious funds. Yes, you're right. Harvard Endowment Fund is, I think, one of the most interesting. So they have a $30 billion fund, 10% of it. So that comes to $3 billion is invested in timber. And the fund manager, Jane Mandela, she's no longer the manager, but she was looking at assets that were going to produce something that the world wanted more of. So for her, putting 10% into the endowment fund made a lot of sense. In addition to Harvard, Yale, they also have timber investments, Northwestern, Duke, right? So there's the Emory, there are these huge endowments that are putting their funds in teak or in timber more generally because they see that it's a different play in diversification. Yes, it is. In some cases, they're doing it domestically. In other cases, they're doing it internationally, but they're doing pretty sizable portions. I think 10% of a $30 billion fund is quite a bit. And in addition to the universities, you have the private families. So you have the John Malones. John Malone specifically, he has about 2.2 million acres of teak. His net worth, I don't know if you know this, Keith, is about $7.7 billion. So when you're looking and you're seeing he has 2.2 million acres, what is it that he knows? How is it that he got to be a billionaire, right? Looking at their investment strategies, seeing what they're doing, seeing where they're putting their money into the market and where they're doing well, I think makes sense for a lot of us and I call myself an average investor. I'm in my higher 20s at this point, and I've learned quite a bit from what other successful people are doing. So you look at the John Malones, you look at the Ted Turners, Irving family, for example, the heirs of the Pingree lumber and wood products. That's probably no surprise to you, but they have millions, if not hundreds of thousands of acres invested. And for the average investor, right, you're thinking about this. And I go, well, today I don't happen to have $10 million sitting in my bank account to go buy a farm in Panama.
You don't?
Surprisingly, no. I may have a 10 million Zimbabwe dollars, right? At today is probably a couple of cents. When you're looking at the opportunities and you're trying to replicate and follow in their footsteps, it's hard if you don't have that $10 million sitting in your bank account. And something that we've been able to do is offer folks who are those average investors. And again, average investors, meaning that you don't have these millions or billions of dollars. And so what we've done is we've surveyed smaller parcels of land, and this is at the existing Panama plantation that I'm going to talk quickly about. It's 18 years old, so 7 years away from harvest. We've surveyed them into smaller parcels to make it easier and more attractive and less financially daunting for the average investor to get involved.
Okay, so we're talking about parcels that have already matured for 18 years. Therefore, in as little as 7 years, they could be harvested, and an investor could get returns in as little as 7 years without having to wait the entire 25.
Exactly. So these trees are mature. They were planted 18 years ago, and they're only 7 years away to harvest. And for the folks who are on the line, right, I know that especially with your group, your Get Rich Education listeners, you're thinking about cash flow. What is this fourplex going to do for me this month or over the next year? And this, I really challenge you to think a little differently for this specific opportunity, because this is more for the long term. We've talked a little bit about the markets. Look at the stability of it. It's been around for centuries at this point. So think for the long term. 7 years isn't really too long. You say 25 years, that's a little bit harder to digest. But 7 years from now, where the trees are already growing, they're mature, they're past any point where there are any risks, right? It's resistant to fire, rot, termites, anything that you may consider to be a risk when it comes to timber. And only 7 years from now is when we'll see the harvest, and then you replant and do it again.
Yeah, that is really remarkable that on this 25-year harvest cycle, you can basically short that, buy parcels of a plantation that already have 18 years of maturity, and you could get that as an investor from day one. So I'm going to ask Rachel some more about that and just what the cost of entry is to get in. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Rachel Jensen. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Cash flow real estate investors, if you're looking for a mortgage loan with a company that specializes in investment property loans, it's Ridge Lending Group. They provide income property loans in almost every U.S. state. Ridge has worked with tens of thousands of investors and homeowners all over the country. In fact, with ethics and transparency, they've helped more people realize their dreams through real estate investing than any other mortgage lender in the country. Get started at ridgelendinggroup.com. MC Laubscher is the host of the top-rated business and investing podcast, Cash Flow Ninja, and also the president and chief wealth strategist of Valhalla Wealth. They help busy people build wealth outside of Wall Street by strategically combining their clients' cash flow statements with the financial vehicle of the wealthy, according to the infinite banking concept. If you are interested to learn how to perpetually multiply your wealth, you can access an exclusive webinar at yourownbankingsystem.com.
This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, author Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And the reason I respect Keith, he's a very strong, smart, bright young man.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our guest, Rachel Jensen. We're talking about the unique opportunity to invest in hardwood timber parcels with property titled to you and in a product, teak wood, that has had value and has been regarded nearly as precious for centuries. So, Rachel, just tell us a bit more about this. So you do have the opportunity to be a parcel owner where you own a title to your parcel or parcels of land in Panama. So just tell us a bit more about that and taxation and some other things.
Sure. So it is a parcel that's titled to you. You can decide if you want to hold it in your personal name. If you have a corporation that you'd like to put it in, you're able to do that as well. I know a popular outlet for some of the younger folks who are still working is through a self-directed IRA corporation. It can't be in your self-directed IRA custodian directly, but you can do it through a corporation that's associated with your self-directed IRA. So there are a lot of options for ownership. You get title to the land and you also own the trees that are on the land. So it's pretty neat. It's yours. You can come down and hug the trees. We just did a tour of the farm. We like to do those at least a few times a year. So folks who are coming down to Panama or at least want to see the farm, you're able to come down. And we do have tree huggers. We have about 220 tree huggers who are part of the farm as owners of individual parcels with us. So that's pretty neat to do, and we'll keep you posted on those dates. But something else that's really neat, and we touched upon reforestation a little bit before, and reforestation in Panama is really so advantageous. The government there, they understand the importance of reforestation efforts and the benefits, right? So they'll pass the benefits down to you as the owner of the parcel. And there are two really big benefits there in Panama as a teak owner with us. The first one is there's no income tax on your property. So you're not going to be paying any income tax in Panama. And the second advantage is that there's no property tax and no income tax on your harvest by the Panamanian government. Now, folks who are listening, talk to your CPA or your accountant back at home about what it looks like for your tax returns there. But in Panama, you have no obligations from tax perspective. Something I want to point out is that it's important to realize, because it's a reforested property, what that means is you commit to replanting and doing it again. So you're going to do this for generations. Think about the kids. Think about the grandkids. If you're still young, you can put it in the name of your parents. Let them see a harvest come through, or your grandparents. It's really a lot of neat ways to title it, to say, all right, friends and family who may think I'm absolutely crazy for looking at alternative investments, here's my way for you to get involved and to really be low entry and a really neat opportunity in Panama. So Panama specifically, I think your listeners are pretty familiar with Panama, but if not, Panama is a really phenomenal country. To be honest, it's an anomaly in Latin America. Keith, you may have realized this too when you were in Panama. It looks like you're in Miami, or it looks like you are in, right, some other developed nation city, because the tall buildings, they have over 80 banking institutions. It's referred to as the Switzerland or the Singapore of Latin America because of the stability there and from the banking perspective. And a lot of that is due to the Panama Canal. Panama Canal's hit its 100-year mark. It's 103 at this point, but it's brought a lot of economic activity to the country. So it's a very stable country, and we're seeing that folks are comfortable with that. They understand Panama. They understand the strength, the stability, and they also understand that there's really good opportunities there for foreign investors.
Yeah, that's right. Even some United States investors that are less used to going ahead and investing overseas, they are more comfortable with Panama because, like you mentioned, you do have the economic stability there more so than you do in other Latin American nations, partly due to the influence of the Panama Canal, even all the way down to the fact that the U.S. dollar is completely legal tender inside Panama. So, well, just tell us a bit more about and how an investor gets in. How far down do you divide the parcels, and how much does it cost for an investor to get in and actually own these individually titled Teak parcels in Panama?
Okay, and one quick fun fact before we get into that is in Panama, they do use the U.S. dollar, but they call it the Balboa. So if you're in the store and they're telling you how much it costs in Balboa, don't get confused because it really just means U.S. dollar. So fun fact there. But getting back to the cost and the size of the parcels. So these are smaller parcels. They're about 1/4 of an acre. And today they're going for $16,700 for the parcel alone. And for the Get Rich Education listeners, we're offering $1,000 off. So when you're completing the form, if you want to grab the Teak resource guide, we see your name come through Get Rich Education, or if you get in touch with us directly, just let us know how you found us because we are offering you $1,000 off. So the parcel by itself is $15,700 and the land is about 1/4 of an acre.
Wow, that is really generous. I didn't expect that. That's appreciated for our listeners because, you know, we have informed listeners that usually ask smart questions and they're concerned about their financial future. And yeah, that's just such a low cost of entry. You can even get in at those price points, $16,700 or $15,700 for Get Rich Education listeners for those parcels that already have 18 years of teak timber growth maturity on them.
Exactly.
Well, that's fantastic. What about the management? Who's going to go ahead and manage it as far as harvesting, the sales, any pruning or any sorts of those things that might happen as one goes along?
Yeah, great question, Keith. So we have a professional management team. Heyo Forestal is the name. They manage thousands upon thousands of hectares of farms all throughout Panama. The fellow and his team that are specifically working on our farm has been the one with us since the beginning. His name is Jacobo. Jacobo helped the group find this farm, 19, 20 years ago at that point when it was just a cattle pasture. So he knows it better than I think he knows the back of his hand, but he and his team do a fantastic job at making sure that the plantation is maintained. There's a little bit of maintenance required for teak, right? One of them is that there are annual cleanings that are done because there are seeds growing and flowers on the top of the trees. And as those land on the ground, they do repollinate and start to grow again. So it's important to make sure that the underbrush is all cleaned, and they do a fantastic job with that. And the really neat part, I didn't mention this earlier, is that there are no annual maintenance fees. So it's the $15,700, and then where the fees come in is at the end. There's a 20% management fee. And what that does is it makes sure that Heyo Forestal is working as hard as they can and doing as much as they can to make sure the teak is the best grade teak possible, and then they get their profit sharing at the end. So fun fact there is $15,700 and then no annual maintenance fees.
Okay, and that's $15,700, just to review again, for a 1/4 acre parcel. And then what's the minimum amount that one needs to buy?
One parcel is the minimum. So we understand that there are different life circumstances for everyone. The minimum is 1, and I think the most we've had is about 12. And that was from a fellow who is in his older 90s, and he was looking to get a parcel for each of his grandchildren. So totally up to you to figure out what makes sense for your portfolio.
Yeah, so very, very approachable thing to do and for you to have in your portfolio there. And yeah, 7 years, that just isn't very far away for you. It's just incredible how quickly time flies. And
It's true.
yeah, maybe if your plan is to go ahead and build up your passive residual income here and you plan to exit your job in 7 years or hope to retire in 7 years, this might very well synchronize with that.
Absolutely.
So markets go up and markets go down here, but you know what? The trees just keep on growing. They have no idea with what happens there. Well, Rachel, you mentioned reforestation, and obviously from an investor perspective, once those trees have hit 25 years of maturity, that's something that we'd want to do for a few reasons. Number one is we're helping the environment. Number two, obviously, we're helping our investment in getting that next generation of trees to grow. But there in Panama, if you are a parcel owner and you participate in reforestation, there's another benefit. Tell us about that.
There is the residency that you can pair up with the parcel ownership. And you're not obligated to go through residency, but this has been a really powerful play by people who are looking for an alternative to their current citizenship or their current residency. Maybe they're not entirely liking what's going on in their home country and they just want to have an option. Maybe you've never been to Panama before and you don't really know much about the country. That's okay too, because the requirement to maintain this specific residency in Panama is only 1 day every 2 years. So you don't need to come down and spend 6 months out of the year there like a lot of other residencies require. This one is easy. It's very affordable. For an additional $4,300, you get your permanent residency. We can help you set up a bank account, and then you can also set up an international corporation as well. And extremely affordable. And we found that even the folks who weren't necessarily considering residency initially have looked back on it and say, you know what? This is one of the easiest residencies in the world right now to obtain and to maintain. I think it's one that I'm going to pursue. And for example, I live in Belize. I have my Panamanian residence through this program specifically, and it wasn't necessarily because I wanted to live in Panama. Right? I think it's a great country. I love the city. I think there are great beaches there, but I love Belize. And I didn't really see myself living in Panama, but it was just so easy to get it that I have it in my back pocket. If there's ever a time that I want to convert it to a citizenship, I only have to wait 5 years after getting it. I am able to do that. And if I ever want to spend a longer period of time in Panama, I'm able to do that as well. So there are no disadvantages to having a residency in another country. It helps give you a place to go in case you ever want to spend extended time there.
Yeah, that is a really interesting side benefit. And is that with ownership of as little as one parcel, Rachel, that you're eligible for that?
It is. So essentially think of residency as a green card and think of citizenship as having your passport. So all stemming from your ownership of a Teak parcel, you can, 5 years after getting your primary residency, get your passport, which is really quite neat.
That is really astounding. Rachel, the more I think about this, this really is potentially ripe for use with one's IRA funds, really, when you think about it and the fact that this is a legacy sort of investment.
Right, exactly. And it's really something that we've seen has been a popular option for people who have their IRA money to put to work. And because it's a low entry, they can pick up a couple of parcels, not think about it, peace of mind. You have the turnkey opportunity with the management company who's taking care of everything for you. And then as you receive your harvest proceeds from that, and then let that generate more into your IRA and let it keep growing. So really neat option there to do it that way. And do you want to have a corporation associated with your self-directed IRA in order to invest in Panama through your self-directed IRA? So just a little heads up there also.
Any last things you want to mention about investing in individually titled Teak parcels, Rachel? Maybe something that I did not think about asking you?
You covered quite a bit of it, but I do encourage folks, if you've never been down to Panama before, to let us know if you want to come down and at least see the farm. We have great tours, and we also go out to the Daydream, which is a spot that not many folks are going to because it primarily is farmland and agricultural land. So it gives you the opportunity to see the countryside. There's a lot of what they call the Cunayalas. They're the indigenous community that populates Panama, and we pass a handful of the Cunayala villages, and it's just a really neat way to experience Panama. And in addition to that, meet other like-minded friends. So you're going on this trip with people who are thinking the same and have the same mindset as you do, looking at international alternative opportunities And I think that's one of the most meaningful parts of it. But do come down to Panama, come on a tour with us. We'd love to show you around the country and, of course, the farm.
Yeah, well, a very interesting opportunity for you to be an international real estate investor, and just as an option, not a requirement, but just as an option in going into the residency program, potentially on the road to citizenship for you. Mm-hmm. If you want to learn more, I really suggest you taking that next step and just reading some more about it. And you can do that with a great special report that Rachel put together for you. You can get that at getricheducation.com/Teak. getricheducation.com/TEAK. Rachel Jensen, it's been great having you here. Thanks so much for coming out of the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Keith, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, yeah, I really enjoyed that chat with Rachel. I always like being around her, too. She's been quite visible at industry events for years. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I've always lived my life in northern climates, Pennsylvania and Alaska. Maybe that's part of the reason why I find these tropical investments so fascinating. I think that's just part of it. Well, Teak has shown to be a stable investment. In 2008, when it seemed like world markets were crumbling everywhere, Teak increased in value by 9.5% that year. In fact, over the last 45 years, Teak has only had 3 down years. Compare that to stocks. They've had 12 down years during that same period. So Teak really is a pretty incredible hardwood. It's really been the key to actually some fairly substantial riches for the ultra-wealthy for centuries, and now plantation investments have allowed a select group of people to potentially gain some pretty strong returns while being a pretty low-risk investment. For the majority of history, an investment in teak has really only been available to those that have a great amount of wealth, but thanks to the increase in teak plantations owned and operated by private corporations and private smallholders like this, specifically in Latin America, this investment opportunity is now available to us, and it just no longer takes an investment of millions of dollars like the Harvard Endowment to become an owner of a teak plantation, and it's a very low-touch investment for you, even when compared to turnkey residential real estate. Well, I have walked Latin American timber parcels myself. In fact, if you ever attend a teak tour, you might very well meet Rachel or meet me, or maybe even meet each of us there. And importantly, this is a great option because they do have inventory at this time. And if you had to, if you bought, you could sell early if you wanted to, because it is your land. You own the 18-year-old trees on top of that land. And additionally, you qualify for residency if you want that option. And they do offer financing for 4 to 6 months of consecutive monthly payments, interest-free. They might be able to finance you longer if you have some sort of extenuating circumstance. So there is no income tax in Panama, but there is likely U.S. income tax to pay if you're a U.S. resident, and there's no property tax at all. If you've been listening to this show for a few years, you know that I personally invest myself in Latin American agricultural parcels. Yes, I make these long flights from Anchorage to Latin America. And by the way, sometimes the only flight itineraries have it so that I have to spend the night in Houston, Texas on the way there. So I guess that's the price that I pay, right? If I want to cross-country ski 5 minutes from my home and then own agriculture in the tropics, those interests are going to be in very different places. What else should I expect? For many of those of you in the contiguous 48 U.S. states and Eastern Canada, it's just not that long of a flight to Panama. I know that most turnkey and agricultural investors buy their property sight unseen and they won't ever visit anyway, but it's just a nice option for you that's there. Panama's a great country to visit with some good tourist infrastructure and so much more for you to see than just your parcels and just the Panama Canal. The canal is a worthwhile tourist attraction on its own. You can actually stand on a public viewing platform above the canal, like I've done before, and watch ships make passage as the locks fill up with water, or you can even ride a ship through the canal as a tourist. And I had no idea that Rachel was going to provide a $1,000 discount for every parcel purchased if you're a Get Rich Education listener. So again, if this is of interest to you, really, when you're at getricheducation.com/Teak, you're doing 3 things at the same time right there. You can read the investor report that Rachel has provided there for you, which has all kinds of interesting stats, and it even shows how much timberland investors have outperformed the S&P 500 over the long term. Secondly, you connect with the provider that way so you can ask some questions. And then thirdly, you've also demonstrated that you are a Get Rich Education follower so that you will be eligible for $1,000 off each parcel. Again, that's at getricheducation.com/Teak. getricheducation.com/TEAK. Well, it has been immensely interesting to talk about this and think about this today. This is Get Rich Education, and while you're out there investing and creating a rich life, consider leaving a rich legacy too. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
Ranked by Forbes as one of the fastest growing cities, Orlando, Florida has a big and diverse economy, yet still features affordable rental properties that cash flow. Our boots on the ground turnkey provider, Greg Bond, wrote a special report to help you discover the amazing market of Orlando. Request your free copy today. Visit getricheducation.com/Orlando. That's getricheducation.com/Orlando.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, getricheducation.com.